Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast all about your Kindle. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is July 21st, 2017. Welcome from Ocean Park, Maine. I'm standing out at the beach at low tide in the evening. The sun is setting behind the cottage, and you can hear the sound of the waves. I'm standing in the water in my bare feet. I think it's about 63 degrees according to the website that I check each day for the sea temperature. And around here that's pretty warm. If it gets up over 60, then it's okay to go body surfing without a wetsuit, and I can stay in the water quite a while when it's that temperature. Of course, it does feel good when you get out and start warming up in the sun. So in a lot of places, I'm sure 63-degree ocean water would not be something that people jumped up and down about at the beach. But here in Maine, that's pretty good. We are going to be here the rest of the summer and then some as we work on a house that we're moving into in Cambridge that's going to require some remodeling, so not sure how long that's going to take, but this is a pretty good place to be hanging out for the next few months. Let's head back up to the cottage, and I'll tell you who our guest is this week and what's ahead on the show. For the interview this week, I traveled via Skype to Chicago to visit with Alex Cabal, creator of a volunteer project that perfects the formatting and text of a select group of great books that you can read for free on your Kindle and other ebook readers.
One of the criteria for the books we accept is that we very specifically don't want to become a sort of dumping ground for everything public domain.
In news, we're going to talk about a notable anniversary for Amazon this week, and a lot of initiatives that we're hearing about, a messaging service, a possible an Alexa phone. I guess that's actually been announced, and some other things. It's a week when it's been hard to keep up with all the reports coming out of new initiatives from Amazon, and I'll tell you all about them. First up in news is an anniversary worth noting. On July 16th, 1995, the first sale to a non-employee took place at Amazon.com. The customer was a computer scientist named John Wainwright, and he bought a book by Douglas Hofstadter titled Fluid Concepts and Creative Analogies, Computer Models of the Fundamental Mechanisms of Thought. A little light reading was that first book bought on Amazon. It's still available for sale from Hachette, priced at the unfriendly price of $15.99 for the ebook version of, by now, a pretty old book. Business Insider ran an intriguing piece timed with the anniversary. It included images of Amazon.com's webpage from 1995, 99, 2004, 2008, 2012, and today. I was actually surprised how similar the old Amazon.com pages looked to the current ones. It's been kind of a gradual evolution over that long period of time. The 1994 page, the first one, had a logo which is no longer in use. It shows a river running through a big letter A, and just below it, in parentheses, was this message: if you explore just one thing, make it our personal notification service. We think it's pretty cool. That gee-whiz voice continues today, along with the culture of trying new things that Amazon's customers might think are cool. The 2008 page featured a photo of the original Kindle, which had been released the previous November. It looked pretty sharp. It was held in two hands like a tablet received on high, and the text next to the Kindle One read, Amazon Kindle is a wireless portable reading device with instant access to more than 140,000 books, blogs, newspapers, and magazines. Whether you're in bed or on the train, Kindle lets you think of a book and get it in less than a minute. Imagine that. By the way, I recently received a request for my thoughts about the upcoming 10th anniversary of the Kindle's debut on November 19th. It was from an email from a PR firm working for Amazon, apparently getting ready for the anniversary. So I sent off a reply that suggested a number of possibilities, including an anniversary edition of the Kindle, maybe a high-end one and a low-end one, or one or the other, deals on Kindle books for people that have bought Kindles in the past. And then I also had an idea for Alexa. If you say, Alexa, good morning, she always has a message for you for each day. I always start my day finding out what what notable time in history she's going to tell me about. So November 19th, it'd be great if Alexa had a message about the Kindle. And then my thought was that would be a great day for Amazon to finally announce how many Kindles it sold in the first 10 years. And if they had Alexa do that announcement, then you'd have the Wall Street Journal and all the media would find themselves quoting Alexa for a piece of hard news about Amazon actually announcing how many Kindles have been sold. I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that one. If you have any ideas about how Amazon might celebrate Kindle Day on November 19th, please send me an email at podchronicles@gmail.com and I will pass them along. Next in news is a scoop by AFTVnews.com regarding Amazon's possibly working on a new standalone messaging app named Anytime. The story ran on July 13th and it was widely picked up by other outlets this week. I first heard about this one from listener James Wellman. The original story was based on a leaked consumer survey that was apparently designed to identify which possible features of the new service might be most important to users. One customer told AFTV News the survey seemed to imply that Anytime is, quote, a ready product. A graphic included with the story showed 11 features of Anytime, beginning with everyone's on it, reach all your friends just using their name, no numbers needed. It is also private and secure, works on desktop, mobile, iPhone, or Android, includes high-quality voice and video calls, games, and the ability to chat with businesses for reservations and checking on orders. The original story concluded with, there's no indication how far along the service is or when we could expect it to launch. I like the sound of Anytime. I'll certainly be glad to try it. I assume it will play nice with the Echo Show, which is becoming an increasingly useful communications platform for my parents. I have our Echo Show here at Ocean Park, and I can say, Alexa, drop in on Lois, and zoom into their kitchen in Cambridge and vice versa. If Anytime gives me a new way to pass a text message onto Mom's Echo Show, for example, that would be pretty cool. I confess that all of these features hinted at in the leaked consumer survey kind of make my head spin in a good way. I use Apple's Messages app for text messages. I have a Facebook Messenger account that I hardly use at all except just to experiment with things like chatbots. It's tough to stay on top of all these choices and communications tools, but it is fun trying. I'll finish up the news with a kind of a lightning round of items that in a normal week I'd probably spend more time talking about. I'll have links to further information about any of these topics in the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com. Number one is Amazon boxes. You can make sure that boxes that you receive from Amazon with stuff in them, maybe from Prime Day, putting them in the recycle bin is great, but even better is that you can put donated items in your empty Amazon box for donations that will end up at your local Goodwill. To find out how, go to givebackbox.com. You set up an account. Amazon announced a partnership with GiveBackBox in December. And what they do is you can print out a free shipping label, and you can also obtain a tax-deductible receipt if you like, and your stuff ends up at Goodwill. Second item, the new Echo. Engadget reported that Amazon is working on a new Echo that will improve on the original Alexa device in practically every way. It will be shorter and slimmer than the original, like maybe 4 Echo Dots stacked on top of each other, Engadget's source said. It will have rounded edges and a cloth-like cover with better sound quality. If this reminds you of images of Apple's HomePod or Google Home, it's probably not a coincidence. But I think it's probably safe to assume that a new Echo 2 will probably cost less than the $349 you'll pay for an Apple HomePod. Google Home is $129. That's less than the Echo, except on Prime Day when it was $90, but the current price is $180. I guess the point is if you've been holding off on buying an Echo, I imagine fall might turn out to be a pretty good time just to see if there's a new one that might suit your needs better. Third item in the lightning round, Amazon Treasure Trucks. This falls into the category of Amazon innovations that seem kind of nuts, but might just work, sort of like those dash buttons set up to order Kraft macaroni and cheese at the press of a button. I did try that. These whimsically designed treasure trucks have been bringing one deal at a time to the streets of Seattle since last year, and now they're going national. To get notified when one is near you, text the word truck to 24193 or sign up for notifications with your Amazon app on iOS or Android. You can also sign up at amazon.com/treasuretruck, all one word. The link in the show notes includes a pretty funny video with weary-looking pirates who have been looking for treasure in all the wrong places until they discover one of these very lively treasure trucks. And last, item 4, Alexa phone. Wired's headline about a new phone that has Alexa built in states, the first Alexa phone gets Amazon even closer to total domination. I'm not sure the text of the story backs this up because the reviewer found that it took 3 seconds or more for the UTC U11 phone to summon Alexa. Google Assistant apparently shows up faster. The two share the phone like roommates. To get Alexa, you just say Alexa or squeeze the phone's edges. You can also say Hey Google or long press the home button for the Google AI. They can be used interchangeably. Wired's review says Google is better for doing things on the phone like sending text messages and making calls, but Alexa is better for doing the 10,000 things that have skills developed for the Alexa platform. By the way, I've got a Samsung S8 that I use for VR, so I did the upload so I can see the new version of Bixby. It sounds friendly, but I can't report anything as to why it would be better than Alexa or even Siri for that matter. I've got two assistants that I rely on for different things quite without thinking about it, and I don't use the Samsung phone. But anyway, there's a new AI in town, and its name is Bixby. Time now for the interview. Alex Cabal is a software developer who created a not-for-profit, volunteer-driven project that brings loving attention to the formatting and editing of more than 100 public domain books. I reached Alex by Skype in Chicago from here in Maine on Wednesday, July 19th. I began by asking him when he created standardebooks.org and what got him started with the project.
It's maybe a year or two old, and I got started because as you might know, there's a lot of free ebooks out there on the internet. Project Gutenberg is a huge producer of free public domain books. And I kind of wanted to start reading some of them myself. And as I was getting around to it, I realized that a lot of the books that they produced they have a lot of errors in them, a lot of transcription errors. A lot of them were produced like over a decade ago. So the technology they used the technology that was used to produce them wasn't as advanced as it is now, so they're missing a lot of features like nice formatting, nice typography, that kind of thing. And Gutenberg seems to have a habit that once a book is produced, it's very rarely updated. And unless it's like a particularly popular one, you can get a lot of good stuff that's less popular, and just because it's less popular, it gets less attention, and so with the first production rarely gets updated. So what I wanted to do was start a project that takes these transcriptions, improves them up to a certain standard that we've put together, a certain typographical standard, produces them for modern e-reading systems like Kindle or any of the other e-readers out there, Kobo, Nook, and so on. And we distribute them for free as well. And the books themselves are already public domain. We also really sell our work into the public domain just in case there was any concern about that. So
when you were reading ebooks from Project Gutenberg back 2 years ago or so, was there one particular error or a bit of sloppiness that bugged you the most that led you to action?
What really bugged me the most was the curly quotes. When you read a book, the left-hand quote is curled in one direction, the closing quote is curled in a different direction. A lot of Gutenberg books, as I mentioned earlier, were produced before Unicode was a standard, and so things like curly quotes weren't even possible back in those days. So it's really not even their fault. It's just the technology at the time didn't support it, and so a lot of the books that they produced are not typographically correct like that. And as I also said earlier, people don't often go back to correct them, and so that's really kind of where I sat down and was like, if I'm reading this book, this random book that I've picked, I want to sort of look its best, at least for myself. And because I have the skill and knowledge to do that, I may as well just go in and do it. And over time, it sort of evolved into a process, and then I put together some tools for myself, and then those tools became a website, and then now there's other people contributing, and it just sort of grew organically from there.
Now, did this grow out of some experience that you had with typography, working for a printer, or where did your knowledge of this area come from?
I've been in the publishing industry for a while, not as a printer, but I run a website for writers. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And I've just been sort of books and literature guy, and after you spend a couple decades reading books, these sort of things, when they're done incorrectly, they start standing out, because most of the time in print it's done correctly.
Yeah, exactly. At what phase of this process did you end up getting your first volunteer to help you out, and how many volunteers do you have working with you now?
The number fluctuates. We had a huge influx very recently. We were featured on some websites like Hacker News, Lifehacker, Reddit, our books. It was kind of a sort of explosion in popularity. And we had a handful of people contributing up to maybe about 6 months or a year ago. And now it seems like this sort of stable number is about 5 to 10-ish. And then obviously people come in and out. Some people just do one book and call it a day. Other people like to contribute more. Other people work on the tool set, and so it's for all of us. It's a hobby. We're all volunteers. We all just kind of do it on our own time in our spare time. So it's whenever people find the time and the interest.
What level of experience or skill is necessary for a volunteer to help you out in a meaningful way?
We accept a lot of skill levels. At the very lowest skill level, you have to have a sort of an eye for detail in terms of typography, right? So at the lowest skill level, all you have to do is read a book. You read one of our productions, and if you catch any typos, for example, the classic example, the miscurled quotation marks, but there's a lot of other errors that can occur. People who have maybe a little bit more skill in copy editing, another very common error that happens in these older transcriptions is that they were OCR'd back in the day, and the computer tried to detect what was a letter, what was a punctuation mark, and then a human proofreader went through and corrected them.
OCR is optical character recognition?
That's right, yes. And so a lot of times what happens is that a book will be produced and the original OCR will ignore a comma, for example. It'll just have dropped it out, and the human proofreader doesn't catch that because that's not on their mind. And so a lot of times you can be reading a sentence and say, well, this doesn't quite sound right, and then you can go back and look at the original page scan of the book that we're talking about and see that, oh, there actually was a comma in there, but the original transcription didn't catch it. That's a very, very common error. And so someone who has a more advanced knowledge of copy editing, sort of English language and grammar, can do that kind of thing. On the more technical side of things, we need people to produce whole ebooks. So you need to have a knowledge of HTML, sort of the basic Unix-style command line. So if you are familiar with Mac development tools or Linux development, that is sort of what we're doing here.
So might you have more than one volunteer doing different parts of the project on a single book?
Generally, it's one producer sort of owns the book. They do it start to finish, and they do a proofread. Once we release it, then we get people submitting typo corrections, errata, that kind of thing, and those are often just one-off contributors.
I see. It says on the site that you lightly modernize the books that you format. How do you know when you might be modernizing it more than lightly? It's a too heavy a modernization. What's that sweet spot that you're after when you update it but not too much?
Yeah, that's the first concern that most people bring up when they see our websites. When we say modernization, we generally mean very simple, direct one-to-one spelling modernization. So, for example, books before maybe 1920, they would spell tonight with a dash. Okay, to a modern reader in the year 2017, that's very unusual. We would see that kind of thing and say, "Oh, it looks pretty old-timey," and it's kind of distracting me. It's mostly that kind of thing. We don't do anything like change grammar or change vernacular. None of that occurs. It's very strictly sort of bringing a word that you already recognize into a spelling that you recognize. Very much like, for example, if you were to read Shakespeare, if you picked up Shakespeare, the original printings from, 16-something, you would see that the spelling in those printings was completely different than what you're used to today. They have the long S's everywhere. They would use V's instead of U's. There would be extra E's at the end of words everywhere. The spelling would be completely different. And then you take an edition from, say, 1850 or 1900 of that same Shakespeare work, and it's already been modernized over the course of those centuries. And so what you might think is the sort of quote-unquote classic Shakespeare is in fact the modernized version that you've been reading for 100 years already. So we're doing things very similar to that, where it's really just spelling for the most part.
You have a guide that is fairly specific things sort of your style book for this work. Is there a way that you can make sure that different volunteers and different projects are exactly following those guidelines that you've set up, or are you just depending on the accuracy with which the volunteers are doing their work?
The guidelines are already sort of what is the standard. So for most productions, a lot of those guidelines will not even apply because they are already like that. We do have a tool, a linting tool, which is sort of the technical term for you take whatever you've produced, and it basically runs an automated style check to sort of try to catch a bunch of errors that you might have not seen. So you can run that, and that'll bring things to attention. And finally, I'm the one at the end who reads all the books that everyone has produced, and I'm ultimately the guy who catches the rest of that stuff.
Does your linting tool tie specifically to the Chicago Manuals of Style that you follow?
The tool we use to apply the typography changes does take a lot of it into account. But again, as I said, Chicago, you'd be surprised. The Chicago Manual, it kind of reflects what has already been done over the past several hundred years. There's very few cases where we actually have to go in and say, maybe we should italicize this instead of quoting it, because it's already been like that in the past.
One thing that I've sort of struggled with ever since I started this podcast 9 years ago is the correct way to spell ebook. And I noticed that in the Chicago, I think Grammar Girl quotes the Chicago Manual of Style saying that the right way to do it is E-book. But on your site, I think you're using it without a hyphen. So have you wrestled with that very important issue as to the right way to spell ebook?
That specific issue hasn't bothered me too much. I'm happy with the way we spell it. I think E-book would... it would be like saying an I-Mac or something, where it just seems a little old-timey at this point. One of our, I think, larger goals in terms of the typography manual is to sort of produce our own one that we can say is entirely ours and that we entirely release to the public domain. And Chicago, for now, is really more of a fallback. The idea is if you have some sort of strange formatting or style question that is in a particular book and you just don't know how to handle it, then talk to us, and then we'll think about it, and then we'll create our own line for that case in our own style manual. So eventually the idea is to simply be able to say, you don't have to have Chicago at all. Just kind of look at what we've produced in the past and how we've arranged all of these rules, and hopefully whatever you need to find the formatting question for is going to be in there.
You're really dealing with this whole issue of the public domain, and generally in the U.S. you have to go back to 1923 before the books have to be older than that to be free of copyright. I've always thought that's a pretty tough limit that is being put on the public domain, and I guess there are real issues as to whether Congress could actually address this and come up with a more fluid sense of copyright that might get more things into the public domain more quickly. But do you have kind of a philosophy, if you were running Congress, or you could write the next rules for how we handle authors' rights and their need to make a living versus the needs of the society to have as much material available as possible?
If you read anything I've written, I suppose on my blog or on Standard Ebooks, you probably suspect that I'm an advocate of shorter copyright term. Copyright is a very important concept. It's not I'm not sitting here and saying that we should throw it out the window entirely. It's extremely important. And in fact, it's so important that the Founding Fathers put in the Constitution. They thought that the concept was so important that they put in the founding document of the nation. What they said was that copyright should be secured for a limited time for the progress of art and culture and science, something along those lines. The regime that we have today, and that has been expanded again and again and again over the past 100 or so years, is one in which the large money-making corporations are able to give money to lawmakers in order to extend their control over all this stuff, so they can make more money off it. The concept of copyright as helping the independent creator is long gone. Really, it's these days it's mostly for the benefit of mega corporations that outlive all of us, by hundreds of years. a better solution would be going back to just simply a shorter copyright term. The number is up for grabs. I mean, I haven't thought of a specific number, but something where a creator is incentivized to produce work because they can feel secure that they'll be able to profit from it exclusively, but not in the sense that you will be able to profit from it for eternity exclusively, and also your grandchildren will be able to profit from it for eternity, and also their grandchildren. At some point we have to realize that culture is something that we all, as creators, draw upon. And when you lock away something and say you can no longer draw upon this, then the well very quickly dries out. There's even a very recent case in music. It was the Robin Thicke song. It was that famous Robin Thicke song, and he lost a copyright lawsuit because it sounded a little bit like an older Marvin Gaye song. Wow. Now, Marvin Gaye passed away a long time ago, and now it's his estates, his descendants, who are trying to milk this situation. Everyone in the trial agreed that Robin Thicke didn't copy the song. It just sounded a little bit like the song, and that was enough for him to lose the trial. So it's situations like that where you're an artist and you heard a song in the past, maybe 10 years ago, and you want to make your own song, and you feel inspired, and no one's going to say you're copying it. You're going to say you're inspired by it. But all of a sudden, these super extremely long and strict and draconian copyright laws are preventing you from creating.
It seems like a while ago the Creative Commons movement was more evident than it seems to be today. This is where an author or a creator could specifically give up certain copyright rights for the purpose of spreading his work in different levels of how much people could modify it and everything. And I never see that in books. I mean, indie publishers, I never see any Creative Commons information on books that are being created now. Did that sort of have its day, and it's not really that much of a factor anymore?
I wouldn't say it's not a factor. I would say that it's just really easy to just do the default, and the default is the extreme protection. I mean, if you wanted to release something in Creative Commons, then you're taking a philosophical stance, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of people just aren't interested in doing that. And that's why legislation is important, because situations like this, where the status quo is controlled by a lot of very wealthy corporations, and the default becomes the sort of very strict rules, it's difficult or impossible to make a change on an individual level. You need the legislation to go in and adjust that. But yeah, I wouldn't say that Creative Commons is irrelevant. I mean, there's tons of stuff being released, and all of Wikipedia is on a Creative Commons license. It's a hugely important resource, thank goodness. Yeah. The other thing that might be hindering the adoption is that indie publishers in general don't make a lot of money. I mean, some of them make enough to get by, but no one's getting super rich off of being an indie publisher, with very few exceptions. So it turns out it's the larger publishers that are producing a lot of the media we consume, and they're the ones who have lobbied for these laws in the first place. So why would they release under Creative Commons? They have absolutely no incentive. Yeah. For them, they're very happy. J.K. Rowling's publisher is very happy to continue milking her book into the year 2500. I mean,
I've been reading the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which I found on your site, and both on my e-ink Kindle and on my Kindle Fire. And I have to say, the tweaks that you do out of standardizing and improving it, they make a huge difference. I feel like I'm reading a modern book as opposed to something that I should be grateful I just have a chance to read and put up with all these formatting errors. I'm kind of surprised at how big a difference these small efforts to achieve some kind of perfection of the typography really are.
Glad to hear you say that. That's the entire point of the project.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, it started out as me doing it for myself because I was kind of upset at how crummy a lot of the books are that are out there, and so I'm really glad that you're finding them nice productions.
Yeah. Okay, so the process, I think I've got the right process for getting them onto my devices. If I'm reading on my Kindle Fire, I go to standardebooks.org. I find the book, and then I choose AZW3 format. It downloads to my Fire, and I can open it up, and it's a Kindle book, and everything's great. So that's a pretty easy process. To get it to my e-ink Kindle, it seems like I have to use a cable to connect my Kindle to my computer, and then when that file gets downloaded to my computer, I can drag it over to the directory of my Kindle, and then it opens up fine. And if I tap on the cover, then it shows up as well, so everything's great. But I wasn't able to take a file that I downloaded to my computer and drag it to the Send to Kindle app that I have on my computer, which I find is sort of the easiest way to get stuff to my Kindle. And is that because it's an AZW file as opposed to a MOBI file, or what is there? Am I missing an easier way to get it there?
No, I mean, that's possible. I have a real beef with Kindle, honestly. If I may rant for a minute.
Well, you have to be careful. This is a very pro-Kindle show, so we like to have our minds open, but consider your audience here.
I understand. From the perspective of an ebook producer who's trying very hard to give all of you free ebooks, let me tell you that Kindle is not making my life easy. They have a very large ecosystem with a bunch of different apps and a bunch of different formats. All those formats are closed, so I actually cannot produce a Kindle ebook file. I have to use a different program called Calibre to create it. That's already a pain in the butt. If you create a MOBI file, which is one type of file that Kindle accepts, certain Kindle apps have very poor formatting for that. For example, text will not be centered when it has to be centered. Things are not aligned correctly. Certain font issues occur. And that seems to be mainly the tablet Kindle apps. For example, if you download the Kindle app for iOS, I think that's one of the ones where that causes issues. The other format, AZW3, doesn't have those issues, and in fact, we can do very nice things like soft hyphens. I don't know if you noticed, but if you're reading Benjamin Franklin on your e-ink Kindle, it might be one of the very few books on your Kindle that has soft hyphens. So you can align, will go to the end of the page, and it'll show a hyphen, and then it'll go to the next line, which almost all Kindle books do not do.
What do they do instead of that?
Today. The word goes to the next line entirely, and you get a big white space there.
Oh, okay. So it'll split up a long word and give you a nicer margin.
Right. That's only available for AZW3 files. So, and now the problem is that even though Kindle is this multi-billion-dollar corporation that has a tight-fisted control over the ecosystem, for some reason their apps are not compatible with all their file formats. So I don't know what to tell you except complain to Kindle. If we release a MOBI book and someone downloads it and it looks bad on their Kindle because Kindle has poor formatting, they're going to blame us. But it's not our fault. We're trying our hardest here, and it's Kindle's fault. If we release an AZW3 book that has very nice formatting and it doesn't read on one of the Kindle apps, well, that's also Amazon's fault. There's nothing I can do about that. So we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here.
What about the possibility of giving download possibilities of both an AZW3 file and a MOBI file, and then people like me that sort of know, that MOBI file is going to work with Send to Kindle, that's going to be my easiest way to get it on here. We'd be sort of making our own choice, and if there was a problem, we'd be kind of responsible for it.
Yeah, I think 90% of Kindle readers don't understand that distinction. They're going to download one, and then they're going to email me when it looks bad.
Okay. So you want to pick the one that's going to look the best.
Exactly. So for those of you who do know the difference, like yourself and your listeners, for example, what we can do is download a program called Calibre. It's an excellent program, and Calibre, you probably already know about it. It converts between different formats. So in fact, we use Calibre. Our ebooks are in the EPUB format originally, which is open and editable, and so we produce them in EPUB, and then we use Calibre to convert to AZW3.
I see.
So what you can do is you can take Calibre and put in really any of the files on our website, not just the AZW3, and convert it to MOBI, and then do what you will with it. And if it doesn't look good, then you can't blame me anymore, because it went through Calibre, and my hands are clean.
Yeah, that makes sense. How many books do you have available on the site at this point?
I think we just broke about 110 very recently. So we had a lot of contributors coming in the past 2 weeks, and production is really ramped up. So I actually have a few backlogged in my review queue. I hope to release a handful in the coming weeks, including a T.S. Eliot poetry collection. There's another H.B. Piper sci-fi novel coming up. We have another guy working on a Keats poetry collection. That one will maybe be another month or two. So there's a lot. We have Vanity Fair in the review queue right now. So yeah, there's a lot coming up, and they're coming in faster and faster, which I'm very happy about.
I checked out the Robert Frost collection north of Boston, and sometimes poetry is pretty hard to handle in any ebook, but it looked pretty clean.
Yes, we have a very specific poetry formatting standard, and you can look that up on our website also if any of your listeners are interested in contributing. We developed a standard where you can have the individual lines of poetry, and as the lines reach the end of the page, they automatically go to the next line with an indentation, and that's something that you don't typically find in a lot of ebooks. Anyone can do it, but I think the process, or rather discovering how to do that, is something that a lot of people don't have time for, and so we spend some time to do that. And so all of the poetry across all of our ebooks, even if you have like a small poem within a larger novel, all that stuff is formatted to that standard, so you can read it pleasantly on your e-reader.
Yeah, and it's crucial because the poet is thinking about those line endings very carefully, and this way, if I was reading the Frost poems and there were some line breaks and I could see the indents and everything was great, when I switched to the horizontal page orientation, then most of the lines didn't break at all because the lines were longer. But the way you set it up really handles the issue of people using different font sizes and different screens. Everybody's going to get to see where the poet wanted that line to end.
Exactly.
If someone has a favorite book that they've been struggling with in Project Gutenberg and it's painful to read because of the problems and they'd love to see it go through your system, is there a way for people to beg for a book to be the next one that you do?
You can beg and plead. I think it's up to the interest of the producers themselves. Again, I began this project because I wanted to read these books myself. So that's very much in the spirit of what we're doing. If there's a specific book you want to read and we don't have it yet, and you feel like you want to produce it and you have the technical skill, please contact us, and you can go ahead and produce it. I'll help you out. I've been helping a bunch of people very recently with starting their own productions, and our tools are fairly well developed now. It's not an extremely arduous process. A lot of it is getting used to how the tools work. Then once you put the ebook together, then you can sit down and you read it cover to cover. You mark any of the errors you find, that sort of thing, and then and that's basically all there is to it. So. Yeah, I mean, if some of your non-technical readers want a book, then yeah, submit it to the mailing list, and we'll put up. Well, if it meets our criteria, we'll put it on the list, and maybe at some point, someone with some technical knowledge will pick it up.
Well, of those over 100 books that you have, is there one that you cherish the most personally? That if you could only save one of those books, and you chose along the lines of which ones affected your life the most, which book would come to mind that has made a particular impact on you?
I have a couple favorites. I think the one with the most life impact might be Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. That one is a philosophy book for your listeners who aren't familiar. It is Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who was sort of a philosopher king, and this book was written as his personal diary, so it's not meant to be published. And it basically sort of outlines his day-to-day life as being the sort of god emperor of this giant civilization. And it sort of reflects his Stoic philosophy, which is something that your listeners can also look up. And I find that philosophy to be very comforting and an important part of my own life. And Meditations was a very good sort of introduction to it. The translation we have is a little older, obviously, but it's still very good, and it has a lot of endnotes that by the translator that are helpful. As far as ones that I've kind of enjoyed in general, I'd say that one of the most surprising ones I read was A Voyage to Arcturus by David Lindsay, and that sounds like it sounds like a sort of pulp sci-fi book, and that's what I was expecting. But I was very, very surprised to find that it was a very sort of deep investigation of a lot of different philosophies, life philosophies, framed in a sci-fi novel. And I went in expecting like laser beams and rockets and just kind of a turn your brain off read, and I left it thinking like, wow, I've read something like very interesting and profound. So I recommend that one to your readers. And then maybe a third and fourth one probably would be Madame Bovary, which is obviously a classic. The translation we have is a very, very good one. It reads like a modern translation, even though it was produced a long time ago. And in fact, it was produced by Karl Marx's daughter, I think. Maybe the last one I recommend would be The Magnificent Ambersons, which I read very recently. That one won the Pulitzer, and I think it was 1919 or 1920, something like that. And it's a book about this old money family in Indiana who are finding themselves caught up in the sort of automobile revolution and the industry barons of the age. And it's how the family deals with it. The characters are very complex. There's really no like clear good guy or bad guy. Everyone's kind of crappy to some extent, and yet you still kind of sympathize with them in how their lives are just being upended, and everyone's are with the coming of industry and the expansion of cities and the sort of disgusting city environment that really existed in the early 1900s, which we don't have today anymore, thankfully.
That's a great list. Well, and there are all kinds of treasures through there. I think anyone that I get a lot of book lovers listening to the show, and I would. It's a fun list to go through. And some I saw, I looked for the Mark Twain and different things, but there's some that I don't recognize. And just by the way you've described those 4 books, it makes me think they'd probably be worth probing and finding some that would be very pleasing surprises.
One of the criteria for the books we accept is that we very specifically don't want to become a sort of dumping ground for everything public domain. I think Project Gutenberg suffers from that for to some extent, where they are more of a sort of archival website at this point. Anything and everything that was produced before 1923 gets on there, and a lot of the stuff just wasn't good. It's like a lot of stuff didn't survive for a reason. So what we want to do is we want to produce books that people think are actually interesting, that hold some kind of relevance, that maybe you would recognize by looking at the title, maybe you wouldn't recognize by looking at the title, but they're still important for whatever reason, and so we do want to take a sort of curatorial stance to some degree.
I have been speaking with Alex Cabal, founder of StandardEbooks.org. Thanks very much, Alex.
Thank you, Len. It's been a pleasure.
In content, I want to let you know about an addition to the Amazon Rapids subscription that you can get. This is for young readers 5 to 12 years old, and it's been around for a while, but they've added something to it where they've got signature stories that are read by the actors that actually play in a couple of hit children's shows developed by Amazon Studios. So the first features in this signature stories are Nico and the Sword of Light and Danger and Eggs. I tried this out when it first came out with my grandson James, who was 9 at the time, and he was kind of interested in it, but he's a really serious reader, so I think he thought this was kind of light fare, but that it might be good for some kids. I think Amazon seems to be perfecting this or enhancing it so that now when you read these stories, they show up like text message threads, and you tap on the icon of a character to hear the next part of the story. And with these new signature stories, they've got actual actors who are reading them, and it's pretty lively. I'll play a little bit of it to you from my Fire tablet, the 7th generation HD8, and this is from Danger and Eggs. So I have the story on my tablet. It looks like a text messages. I'm going to tap on a character and you'll hear what they have to say.
But what about the staring contest?
That was DD Danger, so now I'm going to tap on the next character.
Our Park World record attempt is over, Dee.
That was Philip, so I'll tap on DD again.
But, Philip, where are you going?
Just around this corner, where no one will ever find me again.
Now, as the words are being spoken, they're highlighted in blue so that someone who's using this as a way to get more familiar with reading will hear the words as they're showing up and highlighted on the screen. And it's attractive. It's nicely designed. There's a rock and some grass. You can also create a glossary of words that you're not sure what they mean. Interesting way to get kids interested in reading based on a popular TV show, and I guess a lot of kids are using text messages. They've got phones and they can send text messages, so why not use that as a way to get drawn into reading an actual story? That's it for this week. My guest next week will be Harry Bingham, author of the highly acclaimed Fiona Griffiths detective series. Fiona is a detective from South Wales, and her latest murder case, The Deepest Grave, is a great read. I really enjoyed it, and it's the 6th in the series. I recorded my conversation with Harry this week from his home in London for posting in next week's show. I want to thank those of you who sent in with some stories of Prime Day. That was fun to hear about people buying Echoes and the various adventures on Prime Day that were somewhat similar to my own. And I also had a very interesting email from someone who noted that, a listener who noted that I bought the binoculars to watch the solar eclipse with in Casper. And this is a listener, John, in Lake Placid, Florida, who has been an astronomy enthusiast for probably 50 years. He's about my age, and he knew that this eclipse was coming back when he was a boy, and he's been looking forward to it. And he found that Casper, Wyoming has the best chance of a clear day of any city that the eclipse is going to pass over on August 21st, a month from today. So he and his wife are flying to Denver from Florida and going to drive up. I'm going to be flying into Casper from Boston, so we're going to try to get together for a cup of coffee. I've got a bunch of other folks that I know from when Darlene and I lived in Casper, so it's going to be a busy couple of days in addition to the 2 minutes of watching the eclipse with these powerful binoculars that I bought on Prime Day. Good times. This is Len Edgerly in Ocean Park, Maine for the Kindle Chronicles. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.